Officer Daniel never expected a routine evening patrol to become the most poignant night of his career. From the shadows emerged a tiny, trembling puppy, whimpering softly and clinging to him desperately. Initially, Daniel assumed the little dog was simply lost. However, when the pup began tugging him insistently toward the nearby woods, a deep unease settled in his gut. What awaited him concealed within the darkness took his breath away. It was a heart-rending struggle for survival, a mother's silent cry for help, and a devotion so unwavering it brought him to his knees. This was far from an ordinary call. It was a hidden miracle. As the sun sank low beneath the horizon, casting elongated amber hues over the tranquil town, Officer Daniel adjusted his cap and stepped off the final curb of his evening patrol. The shift had been uneventful, marked by silence. No urgent calls, no emergencies. Just the calm every officer secretly yearns for but seldom experiences. He sighed in relief, anticipating some rest after hours spent patrolling the streets in heavy boots. Just as he rounded the corner toward his waiting patrol car, a faint noise stirred in the distance. Initially barely audible, it sounded like soft scraping. Daniel slowed, instinct sharpening after years on duty. At the edge of the dusty road, a tiny creature emerged. Small and fragile, it stumbled forward, its little paws kicking up dust. It was a puppy, barely a few weeks old, with oversized floppy ears and eyes shining like pools of midnight. Daniel stood frozen, blinking in astonishment. Puppies were a rare sight in this part of town, especially ones wandering alone. He lowered himself slightly, his hand instinctively brushing over the radio fastened to his chest. "Hey there, little guy," he whispered softly, his tone careful and gentle. To his surprise, the puppy didn't bolt. Rather, it waddled purposefully toward him, its tiny legs moving with adorable clumsiness. It halted just inches from him, tilted its head upward, and let out a faint whimper. That subtle sound caused a sudden tightening in Daniel's chest. He reached out a hand, but before contact was made, the pup spun away and trotted a few paces forward, then paused and glanced back as though beckoning him to follow. Daniel chuckled quietly. "What's your plan, huh? Trying to lead me somewhere?" He straightened up, expecting the puppy to lose interest and dash off, but it remained nearby. Instead, it let out a sharp, tiny bark, a yelp that seemed louder than its size warranted on the empty street, and then trotted ahead again, glancing back with a sense of urgency. Looking into those eyes, he sighed and shook his head. This little creature was persistent, but there was something different about that determination. This wasn't just a random stray searching for food. No, this puppy was seeking something, needed something, and for reasons Daniel couldn't fully explain. An uneasy feeling began to settle deep in his bones. He followed the pup carefully, anticipating it might dart away as most strays do when approached. But instead, the little animal stopped suddenly, turned its head, and locked eyes with him. Its eyes were keen, unwavering, and far too intense for such a young pup. Suddenly, with a sharp bark, it dashed forward again, stopping only when Daniel faltered. It seemed as if the little creature refused to move on unless he followed. Frowning, Daniel rested his hands on his duty belt, feeling an uneasy sensation creeping over him. Stray dogs generally begged, circled around seeking food, or bolted in fear when confronted. Yet this one neither sought scraps nor comfort. It sought guidance. It wasn't aimlessly wandering, it was leading the way. Daniel's instincts urged him to ignore the animal, return to his car, and leave the situation to animal control. Still, a quiet voice deep within told him otherwise. The pup barked again, sharp and demanding, piercing through the calm evening air. Then it trotted forward, its tail rigid and ears alert as if functioning like antennas, halting every few steps to glance back at him. Whenever Daniel hesitated, the pup whimpered, pacing urgent small circles as though begging him to hurry. The behavior was strange, unnervingly purposeful, almost human-like in its determination. Daniel rubbed the nape of his neck, a sinking feeling of unease growing heavier in his chest. Throughout his career, he had encountered many unusual scenes, frightened strays, panicked animals, even injured pets in desperate need, but nothing quite like this. "All right, buddy," he murmured softly, his tone blending suspicion with curiosity. "You've got my attention. Lead me where you want to go." The pup yipped in response and darted ahead once more, kicking up small puffs of dust along the fading road. This time, Daniel trailed more intentionally, his boots crunching on the gravel beneath him. Despite his efforts to rationalize it as merely a lost animal seeking solace, a persistent unease gnawed at his stomach. Something felt off. The little dog wasn't pleading for food. It was clearly in need of assistance. The puppy's paws lightly tapped on the dirt road as it hurried forward, then paused to look back, ensuring Daniel was following. Each look was filled with urgency, as if time was slipping away. Daniel adjusted the flashlight strapped to his side and exhaled deeply. He knew he should report this over the radio, yet an instinct told him to trust the pup. With cautious steps, he pressed on. As the road narrowed, it curved toward a dense and shadowy forest. Daniel hesitated. The woods stretched dark and seemingly endless, their shadows deepening with the fading twilight. He had patrolled this area before. The locals steered clear of it after dusk. There were too many tales of coyotes and numerous accident reports along the unlit trails, but the puppy was undeterred. It let out a sharp bark, its small body shivering with determination, then darted into the first cluster of trees. Muttering a curse, the officer followed. There was something about the urgency in the puppy's cries that gnawed at him. Branches snagged his uniform as he pushed through the underbrush. The rustle of dry leaves underfoot merged with the rapid patter of the puppy's steps. Daniel kept his flashlight low, its beam cutting through the thick foliage. The air grew colder, heavier with stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The small dog would dash ahead a few paces, pause, bark, and wait patiently until Daniel caught up before moving forward once more. It wasn't wandering without direction, rather it was leading him deliberately. Minutes slipped by, though they seemed much longer than they actually were. Each footstep drew him further into the dense darkness surrounding them. Doubts nagged at his mind. Why am I out here chasing after some stray? Yet every time the thought of turning back surfaced, the sharp yelp of the puppy urged him onward. Daniel's jaw clenched. Over his years of service, he had learned to trust his instincts, and tonight, those instincts screamed that this was no ordinary cry for help. The deeper he moved ahead, the stronger the sensation pressing on his chest became. Something, or someone, awaited him at the end of this trail. As Daniel ventured further in, the forest silence grew almost oppressive. The gentle crunching of his boots and the rapid skittering of the pup's paws were the only noises piercing the ghostly stillness. Even the breeze seemed to pause, as if the very trees were leaning in, listening closely. His flashlight's beam sliced through the twisted branches and moist soil, illuminating specks of dust and tiny insects, drifting like ethereal phantoms. Then, abruptly, he stopped in his tracks. From somewhere ahead came a faint, fragile sound. Not the puppy's bark. Initially, he wondered if he'd simply imagined it, an echo or some trick played by the forest. But then the sound came again, a soft, broken whimper, distinct and deeper. It wasn't the cry of a young dog, but something older, frailer, and weighted with suffering. Daniel's heart rate surged. Raising his flashlight higher, his jaw tightened further as he scanned the encroaching shadows. The puppy let out a sharp bark and dashed toward the source of the sound. "Wait," Daniel called, quickening his pace to catch up. The whimpering came again, clear and unmistakable this time. Someone, or something, was in pain somewhere in the darkness. Daniel's hand trembled, causing the beam of his flashlight to flicker as adrenaline flooded his veins. He swallowed deeply, forcing his breathing to even out. This was no longer a mere innocent detour. His instincts were screaming that the small dog wasn't playing a game. It was guiding him toward a harsh reality. He pushed forward, the crunch of twigs snapping beneath his feet mingling with the pounding of his heart. The cries grew stronger, more urgent, each whimper slicing through the silence like a desperate plea. The puppy halted just ahead, its tail rigid and ears perked. It barked again, this time with greater urgency, as if pleading for Daniel to hurry. Narrowing his eyes, Daniel swept the flashlight over a tangle of fallen branches and thick undergrowth. For a moment, the forest floor appeared motionless, just dirt, stones, and scraggly brush. Then, at the very edge of the light's glow, a faint movement caught his eye. A form, barely perceptible, quivered faintly amid the shadows. His breath caught, realization dawning slowly. It wasn't just an ordinary creature, it was something larger, vulnerable and broken, hidden beneath the debris of nature. The puppy whimpered once more, circling the spot and pawing frantically at the earth. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of fear and empathy flooding through him. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, fully aware that what he was about to discover would change the course of this night. Forever. Daniel's flashlight beam steadied, illuminating the shivering figure nestled beneath the thicket. Gradually he advanced, his boots softly crunching on the moist forest floor. The puppy emitted a single sharp, high-pitched bark before whimpering, clawing desperately at the tangled branches. With a swift motion, Daniel dropped to one knee, sweeping his light over the area. His breath caught immediately. Beneath a fallen tangle of branches lay the gaunt body of a German shepherd, barely visible. Her coat was matted and patchy, her frame shockingly thin. She struggled feebly, each shallow breath rattling her ribs. The heartbreaking sight pierced Daniel's soul. He knelt closer as the mother dog lifted her head faintly, her eyes glazed yet attentive. In that brief instant, there was no doubt. The puppy belonged to her. She let out a soft, desperate whimper as if pleading for understanding. The pup scurried to her side, pressing its small body against her muzzle and licking furiously, as if trying to revive her with its love. Daniel's chest tightened, making it hard to breathe. This was not merely a stray wandering alone. This was a helpless child begging for someone to save its mother. His throat burned as he carefully reached forward, gently brushing aside the smaller branches trapping her. She flinched at the sudden movement, but her gaze never wavered. Those weren't the eyes of a wild animal. They were the eyes of a mother who had battled relentlessly, only now standing on the brink of surrender. Daniel clenched his jaw tightly, overwhelmed by a surge of emotion pressing against his chest, almost as if he could hear her silent plea. "Please, don't leave my baby alone." He swallowed hard, keeping his voice low and calm. "It's all right, girl. You held on long enough. I've got you now," he whispered. The puppy whimpered more loudly, circling Daniel before nestling against the mother's frail body. The tiny cries shattered the stillness of the forest, tugging fiercely at every part of his heart. Fighting back tears, Daniel gently stroked the mother's head. Her ears twitched faintly beneath his touch, and she released a soft sigh, as if comforted by the presence of another. He exhaled sharply, his mind racing through the situation. She was starved, parched, and likely injured after being trapped beneath fallen branches. Yet, despite her weakness and pain, she had endured long enough for her pup to find aid. Straightening his posture, Daniel's resolve hardened. There was no way he was going to abandon them here. The tiny pup hadn't given up, and neither would he. Reaching for his radio, his voice remained steady despite the tightness in his throat. "Dispatch, this is Officer Daniel. I have an emergency. Injured adult female dog located near Forest Edge Trail. Request immediate rescue support." The static crackled in the radio's response, but Daniel barely registered it. His attention was fixed on the delicate pair before him. The devoted pup, the fading mother, and the unbreakable bond that had kept them alive against incredible odds. One hand stayed on the radio, while the other rested gently on the mother's trembling side. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the static, relaying the message. "Rescue team en route, estimated arrival time, 2 hours." Daniel's jaw tightened in frustration. 2 hours. She didn't have that kind of time. His eyes dropped to the delicate German shepherd, her chest rising and falling with labored breaths, and then to the restless puppy pawing anxiously at her neck. Time was slipping away, slipping through his grasp, and with it, 2 precious lives. A chilling clarity struck his heart. Waiting would mean losing her. He clicked the radio back onto his belt and quickly surveyed the area, his mind racing to find a solution. The branches pinning her were not overwhelmingly heavy alone, but combined with her frailty and injuries, they were fatal. Without hesitation, he removed his jacket, folding it into a makeshift pillow, and gently eased it under her head. "Hold on, girl. Don't give up now," he murmured, his voice thick with urgency. The puppy let out a sharp bark, as if echoing the desperate command. Daniel inhaled deeply and pressed his hands against the largest branch. His entire body tensed, muscles straining as he exerted all his strength. The branch groaned under his effort, its roots digging stubbornly into the ground. His arms trembled and sweat poured down his face, but he refused to stop. The dog let out a soft whimper, her eyes locked onto him, a fragile glimmer of hope flickering in her gaze. Come on, Daniel gritted through his teeth. With one final powerful push, the branch shifted just enough to free her chest. She gasped, a weak, rattling breath that tightened his throat, but the relief of easier breathing showed she was still fighting. The puppy quickly snuggled closer, licking her fur as if to celebrate their small triumph. Yet Daniel understood that it was far from enough. She remained too feeble, dangerously close to the brink. Lowering himself to the ground, he spoke softly. I'm getting both of you out of here. Gently, he slid his arms beneath her delicate frame, supporting her with all the steadiness he could summon. Her weight surprised him, lighter than expected, a mere shadow of the robust German shepherd she once had been. Still, despite her fragility, her body seemed burdened by the sheer will to survive. She whimpered quietly as he lifted her but made no attempt to struggle. The puppy trailed at his feet, barking urgently as if urging him to move sooner. Daniel stood, adjusting his hold on her to keep her secure. Behind him, the tangled branches and undergrowth that had trapped her now lay scattered, but he dared not glance back. His instinct screamed at him to speed up. The path before him was shadowy and rugged, stretching deep into the forest. Yet he pressed onward without hesitation. Hold on, girl. Just a little longer, he murmured, his voice trembling. The puppy surged ahead, guiding the way, its sharp cries resonating through the quiet woods. Together they embarked on a desperate race against time, each step a struggle. Every moment a silent plea, hoping they hadn't arrived too late. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly as Daniel pushed himself forward. Each movement grew more difficult than the one before, the German shepherd limp in his arms, her breath shallow and fragile, every exhalation rattling softly against his chest. The puppy dashed ahead and circled back repeatedly, its high-pitched barks spurring him onward to quicken his pace. Branches tore at his uniform, while thorns scraped raw his arms, yet Daniel paid no heed to the sharp sting. His sole focus was on keeping her alive long enough to reach safety. The burden he carried was more than physical. It weighed heavily on his heart, heavier than any he had borne on duty before. His muscles cried out in protest, shoulders burning fiercely as he adjusted her position to keep her steady. Every few steps, he stumbled over roots concealed beneath the earth, but he never let her slip from his grasp. Sweat streamed down his face, blending with the dirt smeared across his skin. He clenched his teeth, gasping for breath with ragged inhales and exhales. Don't give up, he whispered to her, his voice shaking. I won't let you go. Not this night. The pup barked once, almost in agreement, then darted ahead, leading him toward the faint glow of light peeking through the tree line. Yet the trail grew steeper, the forest floor slick with moisture-laden moss. Daniel's boots slipped unexpectedly, his knees buckled, and for a terrifying moment, he nearly dropped her. Panic surged through him. He squeezed tighter, lowering himself to one knee to steady his breathing. The mother dog whined softly, her ears twitching against his arm, a reminder sharp as a blade that she was still fighting. She hadn't surrendered, and neither could he. With a guttural sound, half grunt, half prayer, he forced himself upright, driving his body forward despite the pain. Minutes stretched endlessly. His arms ached, his back screamed, but stopping was not an option. The puppy remained nearby, never wandering far, its tiny body trembling with fierce determination. Daniel's eyes stung, not from sweat, but from the intense emotions swelling deep within his chest. This was far more than a mere rescue mission. It was a battle for family, loyalty, and a love that went beyond what words could express. Gradually, the dense forest began to thin, the moonlight streaming onto the path like a guiding beacon. He carefully adjusted her in his arms one final time, whispering hoarsely, "Almost there, girl. Almost home." Behind him, the pup yipped urgently, keeping pace as Officer Daniel pressed forward. Every bit of his strength was dedicated to the silent vow he'd made, to save her, no matter the cost. At last, the forest opened into a clearing, but his relief was fleeting. The German shepherd's body felt heavier now, her shallow breaths growing slower with each moment. He staggered ahead, his muscles straining, Yet the weight of dread pressing down on him was far heavier. The puppy let out a sharp whine, circling his feet, sensing the critical tension hanging in the still night air. Daniel muttered softly, his voice breaking, "Just hold on a little longer. We're almost out." Yet even as he spoke, he felt her body twitch faintly, her head sagging further against his chest. His heart seized. He dropped to one knee within the clearing, gently placing her down on the grass. Immediately, the pup pressed close, pawing frantically at the dog's muzzle and licking her face as if trying desperately to rouse her. A faint whimper escaped her lips, her chest rising unevenly, eyes fluttering, half open. A tightness gripped Daniel's throat. He ripped off his cap, flinging it aside, then ran a shaky hand over his face, overwhelmed by the moment. For the first time throughout the night, a flicker of doubt gnawed at his heart. Was he too late? Had the small pup's desperate quest only driven him to heartbreak? No, he gritted through clenched teeth, banishing the thought as his training took over. He leaned in, pressing his ear close to her muzzle, listening intently. There were faint, uneven breaths, weak yet still present. His heartbeat quickened. She was not gone yet. He wrapped his jacket tighter around her fragile frame, carefully tucking it in to conserve the precious warmth she had left. "Stay with me, girl," he whispered fiercely. "You fought this far. You're not giving up now." The puppy whimpered softly, nestling against her neck, its tiny body trembling in unison. The sight tore at him, a harsh reminder of the delicate boundary between life and loss. Drawing on his remaining strength, Daniel scooped her back into his arms. His muscles screamed in protest, his vision blurred from exhaustion, but he forced himself to stand. Fixing his gaze on the trail ahead, he caught a faint outline of his patrol car barely visible through the trees. Each step was a struggle, his body threatening to collapse, yet he pushed forward with unwavering resolve. Behind him, the forest seemed to close in, swallowing the silence once again. Ahead, a fragile glimmer of hope persisted. The German shepherd exhaled one weak sigh, her body limp but still breathing. The puppy let out a single, high-pitched bark, urgent and insistent, as though proclaiming to the night, "This fight isn't over." Suddenly, Daniel burst from the tree line, his lungs burning and arms trembling beneath the delicate weight of the German shepherd. His patrol car stood just ahead, shimmering softly under the pale glow of the moonlight. The puppy yelped frantically, darting to and fro as though urging him to hurry. Each stride dragged endlessly, his boots pounding the ground with a frantic beat. The mother dog shifted slightly in his arms, her shallow breaths rasping against his chest like fragile whispers. Every sound served as a grim reminder that time was slipping away. He murmured hoarsely, "Hold on, girl. Just hang in there." Upon reaching the car, he swung open the rear door with his elbow and carefully laid her down on the seat. The pup scrambled in right behind her, pressing close against her side, unwilling to lose sight of her. Daniel slid behind the wheel, slammed the door shut, and flipped on the siren. The night shattered with the wail as the engine roared to life. Gravel scattered beneath the tires while the patrol car surged forward. Headlights sliced a desperate path through the empty roadway. Every second ticked like a countdown. Every mile challenged whether they'd reach help before it was too late. His fingers clenched the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. He stole quick glances in the rearview mirror. The puppy paced restlessly across the seat, crying softly and licking its mother's face between whimpers. She barely moved, her chest rising in shallow, uneven bursts. Daniel's heart thumped painfully against his ribs, fear twisting in his gut. He pressed harder on the gas pedal, the siren piercing the night air. "Stay with me," he whispered repeatedly as if chanting could bind her life to this world. At last, city lights flickered faintly in the distance. The veterinary hospital's bright red sign shone like a guiding light, urging him onward with renewed desperation. Daniel skid into the parking lot, tires screeching as he slammed the brakes. Before the car had come to a complete halt, he was already out of the vehicle, scooping her up once again into his arms. The puppy jumped down, closely trailing behind him. As the hospital doors slid open, the staff hurried forward, alarmed by the sound of sirens and the lifeless form cradled in his embrace. "It's critical," Daniel gasped, his voice hoarse. "She's struggling to breathe." Within moments, several hands reached out to take her, quickly lifting her onto a gurney. The puppy let out a distressed cry as the mother disappeared into the stark, brightly lit corridor. Daniel stumbled after them, his chest heaving with each breath. silently praying that there was still time to save her. The waiting room was oppressively quiet, the sterile white walls feeling more like a confining cage. Daniel collapsed into one of the hard plastic seats, his chest still rising and falling rapidly from the adrenaline. The puppy nestled at his feet, its tiny frame trembling, eyes wide and fixed on the hallway where the mother had been carried away. Each soft whimper it made resonated deep within Daniel's heart, a painful reminder of how precariously the mother dog's life hung in the balance. He brushed a weary hand across his face, exhaustion weighing heavily upon him. Yet sleep was far from his thoughts. Overhead, the fluorescent lights buzzed relentlessly. Too bright, too piercing. The ticking clock on the wall seemed amplified, each second hammering into his skull. Time dragged on, minutes stretching endlessly like hours. Leaning forward with elbows on his knees, Daniel absent-mindedly ran his fingers through the puppy's soft fur, grasping for calm amid the storm of his racing mind. The tiny creature nestled close to his leg, seeking solace while offering him comfort in return. He swallowed deeply and murmured, "She's resilient. She will make it through. She has no other choice." His voice faltered, revealing the fear gnawing at his core. As the moments dragged on, unwelcome and painful memories began to resurface. He recalled his own childhood dog, Max, the faithful golden retriever who had shadowed him throughout his youth. He remembered the night Max didn't return home, the desperate search, and the overwhelming sorrow when they discovered him too late. That old wound, long buried, tore open again, raw and tender. Clenching his fists, he pushed the thought aside. He stubbornly refused to believe this night would culminate in the same tragic ending. Not after everything, not after the pup's urgent plea had brought him here. At the hallway's end, the doors briefly swung open as a nurse hurried past without stopping. Daniel's heart both leapt and sank in the same instant. He exhaled uneasily, forcing himself to remain patient despite his despair. The pup whimpered softly and looked up at him, its eyes glistening with the very question pounding in his own heart. Will she make it? Lowering himself, Daniel gently pressed his forehead against the pup's, whispering, "She's going to be all right." His words were as much a prayer as a vow. Suddenly, footsteps shattered the heavy silence, reverberating down the corridor like a tense drumbeat on Daniel's nerves. He bolted upright in his chair as the puppy sprang to its feet beside him. Through the double doors, a man in a white coat appeared, his face unreadable. Daniel's heart pounded painfully in his chest. He scrutinized the doctor's face, desperately seeking any hint, any sign, but the stillness in the vet's eyes revealed nothing. The puppy whimpered softly, pressing its little body against Daniel's boot, as if it too sensed the gravity of the moment stretching on endlessly. The veterinarian remained silent, carefully pulling off his gloves. Daniel's breath caught, and his throat felt parched. "Please, tell me," he implored, though his voice trembled with emotion. At last the vet met his gaze, his expression softening. "She's in critical condition," he said cautiously, "but you brought her just in the nick of time." The words struck Daniel like fresh air rushing into lungs long held captive. A wave of relief swept over him so intensely that his knees nearly gave way. Pressing a hand against his face, he swallowed the surge of emotions threatening to spill over. "There," the puppy yipped, its tail wagging weakly as though it understood the change in the atmosphere. Daniel lowered himself to crouch, scooping the pup into his hands and holding it close to his chest. "You did it." "Little one," he whispered, his voice shaky. "You saved her." The puppy licked his chin, its small body wriggling with a happiness that sharply contrasted the heaviness hanging over the night. Daniel let out a weak laugh, a choked sound that was part tears, part relief. For the first time since the frantic chase began, he allowed himself to breathe freely. The vet knelt beside him and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "She's not out of danger yet," he cautioned softly. "But thanks to you, she stands a fighting chance." Daniel nodded, his eyes shimmering. His gaze dropped to the puppy, who kept watching the hallway where its mother lay. "It's because of us," he murmured gently in correction. Amid the hushed stillness of the waiting room, enveloped by shadows of fear and glimmers of hope, an undeniable truth settled deep within his heart. Occasionally, the faintest, most fragile voice can ignite the most extraordinary miracle. Days passed in a quiet haze filled with brief visits and meticulous observation. Each morning and evening, Daniel returned to the modest recovery room where the German Shepherd rested, her body wrapped snugly in warm blankets. Soft, mechanical hums from nearby machines monitored every delicate heartbeat. The little puppy never left her side, curling up against her chest, its tiny form rising and falling with her breath, as if trying to breathe life back into her. The sight always tugged at Daniel's heartstrings. A poignant reminder that even in moments of weakness, love remains the strongest bond imaginable. At first, progress came agonizingly slowly. She could barely lift her head. Her tired eyes were clouded with fatigue. Nurses brought her small bowls of water and tiny portions of food, but it required gentle coaxing and great patience to encourage her to eat. Throughout it all, Daniel stayed by her side. His large hands rested softly on her fragile body, as he whispered words of encouragement she may or may not have understood. "That's it, girl. Just one more bite," he would murmur, watching the pup lick her muzzle, as though rallying her spirits. Gradually, little by little, she began to respond. By the week's end, the transformation was unmistakable. Her eyes, once dull and lifeless, started to shine with cautious glimmers of life. She began moving her paws more confidently, testing her strength, and even raised herself halfway into a sitting position. The puppy yelped eagerly, its tail thrashing wildly as it pressed its nose triumphantly against hers. Daniel's chest swelled with a mix of relief and pride, tears pricking his eyes as he witnessed the miraculous moment unfold. The connection between mother and pup was unshakable, and he realized that he too had been drawn into their struggle for survival. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the room in golden hues through the shutters, Daniel entered to find her standing unsteadily, the puppy gleefully hopping around her paws. Though she wavered, she remained upright. For a fleeting moment he stood still, overwhelmed by the sight. Then, with a gentle laugh, he lowered himself to the ground and opened his arms wide. The mother dog staggered forward, resting her head against his chest while the puppy barked joyfully at his side. Daniel cradled them both, his throat tightening with emotion. In that instant, he understood they were not merely healing, they were forming a family. By the time the second week arrived, the recovery room had transformed from a mere hospital space into a comforting second home. Daniel had claimed a worn chair in the corner, a testament to his frequent visits, where he spent long hours simply sitting with them. The German Shepherd regained strength daily, her steps became more assured, and her eyes gleamed with vitality. Meanwhile, the puppy, once anxious and restless, now frolicked cheerfully at her feet, tugging playfully at her ears and chasing his tail, always returning to her side. Observing their bond, Daniel sensed something awakening deep within him, something beyond responsibility, more profound than duty. One afternoon, as he gently scratched behind the pup's floppy ears, a quiet certainty settled over him. He found himself unable to let them leave. They were no longer strays, nor merely rescues. They belonged to him now. This realization stirred a mix of warmth and apprehension within him. Having devoted his life to helping others, he often sacrificed personal connections along the way. Yet, as he watched the mother nuzzle her muzzle against his hand and saw the puppy wagging its tail energetically at the sound of his voice, he realized they had already made their choice, him. The adoption paperwork turned out to be unexpectedly straightforward. When the veterinarian inquired if he wished to begin the adoption formalities, Daniel responded without hesitation. "Yes," he declared with conviction, feeling his chest swell with determination. The staff exchanged knowing smiles. They had already observed the bond forming well before he acknowledged it himself. The days that followed were consumed with paperwork, signatures, and necessary preparations. Still, none of those details mattered as much as the expression in their eyes when he entered the room. Their unconditional trust spoke volumes beyond words. Finally, the moment arrived when he guided them out of the hospital. The mother strolled deliberately yet proudly by his side, while her pup bounded ahead on wobbly legs, the leash hanging loosely in Daniel's steady grip. The golden hues of the evening sun stretched their shadows across the pavement. Looking down at them, Daniel's lips lifted into a rare, genuine smile. "Let's go home," he murmured softly. With the puppy barking joyfully and the mother leaning gently against his leg, he understood their connection was now unbreakable. They had ceased to be mere survivors. They had become family. That first night at home was calm, almost eerily so. Daniel settled onto his couch, the room bathed in the gentle illumination of a solitary lamp's glow. The German shepherd lay quietly at his feet, her body curled protectively around her puppy, who was already lost in a deep slumber. For the first time in weeks, the incessant buzz of anxiety had vanished. In its place, a flood of emotions surged. Daniel had been bottling everything up. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the floor as the heavy silence enveloped him. Memories of that night in the forest came crashing back. The desperate cries, the struggle against the tangled branches, the weight of her lifeless form in his arms. His chest tightened as each moment replayed vividly, every detail more piercing now that immediate danger was behind them. He recognized how close he had come to losing them, how easily the story could have ended in heartbreak. His hands trembled as he ran them over his face, his throat tightening with the words he couldn't voice. For years he had built walls around himself, walls constructed to keep pain at bay. But tonight, those defenses finally gave way. Tears blurred his sight before he could hold them back. He bent down, placing a gentle hand on the shepherd's head. She lifted her eyes, soft and understanding, and pressed her muzzle into his palm. That simple touch unraveled him completely. His voice cracked as he whispered, "You saved me, too." The puppy stirred at the sound, clumsily climbing into his lap, its tiny tongue brushing against his cheek. Daniel laughed through his tears, clutching the pup to his chest while the mother drew closer, her steady gaze mending his fractured heart. In that delicate, tear-streaked moment, Daniel grasped a profound truth. The small puppy hadn't merely saved its mother. It had saved him as well. It rekindled in him the belief that love, loyalty, and a sense of family could still exist, even during the darkest of nights. Wiping his face with the back of his hand, he drew the two dogs closer into a tight embrace. "We're all in this together now," he whispered, his voice quivering yet certain. As the room settled into the gentle cadence of their breathing, Daniel experienced a completeness he hadn't felt in years. The days that followed brought a fresh kind of rhythm to his life, one Daniel hadn't known he was missing. Morning patrols were now complemented by lively barks that echoed through his modest home. The puppy rolled across the floor in endless bursts of boundless energy. Meanwhile, the mother dog, still on the mend, grew steadily stronger each day. Her once tentative steps became confident and proud. Every time Daniel came home from work, he was welcomed not by silence, but by wagging tails and eyes that shone with recognition. The void that had once lingered in his house was replaced by warmth and affection. Neighbors soon observed the transformation too. The officer who once walked alone was now accompanied by two devoted companions. Children's faces brightened as the puppy eagerly bounded toward them, while adults offered respectful nods to the shepherd's calm and protective demeanor. For Daniel, this was far more than mere companionship. It was a family he hadn't realized he longed for. The connection born out of desperation had flourished into an unbreakable bond. Every glance and touch now told a story of survival, faithfulness, and a love that transcended all circumstances. One evening, Daniel sat quietly on his porch, watching the sunset spill its colors across the sky, with the puppy nestled comfortably in his lap. The shepherd rested faithfully at his side as Daniel whispered words that seemed meant not only for the animals, but for the world itself. "Often, the faintest cries lead us to the most profound miracles," he murmured. His voice drifted gently on the breeze, yet he felt the truth behind his words resonated more powerfully than any alarm. What started as a frantic pursuit through the forest had transformed into a journey that healed broken hearts, theirs, the puppy's, and his own. Their story soon became a universal reminder. Loyalty speaks no tongue, love manifests in the unlikeliest shapes, and even the quietest voices can guide us towards something far greater. Daniel had ventured into the night as a tired officer, ready to conclude his shift. But he emerged with a family forever changed. As the scene fades to black, a lasting message remains. Treasure the bonds you hold, for sometimes they do more than save others. They save you.